A midlife crisis is more than just a cultural stereotype. It's a real psychological struggle that can surface between the ages of 40 and 60. Often triggered by aging, loss, or unmet expectations, it can actually lead individuals to question their identity, make impulsive choices, or abruptly abandon long term commitments. While not officially classified yet as a mental illness, the emotional and relational fallout is very real, especially for the spouses and families left behind. This podcast gives voice to those living through the aftermath, exposing the hidden pain, and seeking accountability, healing, and understanding. Thank you for joining us today on MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. The stories and events discussed in this podcast are for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or professional advice. Any names, locations, or identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Any similarities to actual persons, living or dead, or real events are purely coincidental. The information presented on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. Always consult with a qualified expert regarding any decisions related to your specific situation. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the podcast creators. When we use metaphors like Stranger Things, Vecna, demons, or the upside down, we are speaking symbolically, not literally, you guys. We are not saying people are possessed, evil, or under supernatural control. These metaphors today are used to describe psychological processes such as dissociation, identity disruption, trauma responses, moral disengagement that can occur during extreme stress, midlife crisis, or betrayal. These processes may help explain behavior, but they do not excuse harm and they do not remove personal responsibility. Today's episode is for education and awareness, not diagnosis, and nothing here replaces professional mental health care and attention. Welcome back, Bomb Squad, to Midlife Crisis, Bomb Drop, and Beyond. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about Stranger Things, super popular TV show, and how there are some correlations to it. I think is betrayal, midlife crisis, and some things like that. So, in Stranger Things, the upside down is a dark, decaying parallel dimension. It sort of mirrors the real world of Hawkins, Indiana, but in a corrupted, frozen state. And again, this is a totally fictional show, you guys. But in the show, there's like the same buildings, the same roads. Um, but it's also inhabited by hostile creatures like demogorgons and the Mind Flayer. But it exists alongside the normal world, not in the past or future, but sort of behind it like a shadow. And the upside down became accessible when 11, a child with psychokinetic abilities, made contact with a creature during a government experiment. And this tore a hole between the worlds, allowing monsters to cross over. The upside down sort of leaked into reality. The Mind Flayer attempts control of the human world. So the upside down is not just evil, but it's sort of a consequence of trauma, experimentation, and unchecked power. And what does it mean symbolically? Well, this is where the show becomes very psychological. And I think a lot of us that are suffering from betrayal trauma and things will see this. The upside down represents unprocessed trauma, suppressed fear, emotional damage that people try to ignore. It's the place where pain goes when it's not dealt with. Does that make sense to anybody out there? So just like trauma, it exists even when it's unseen. Just like trauma, it bleeds into your everyday life. And just like trauma, it grows stronger when ignored. So, we all know the Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of ourselves that we repress, like fear, rage, shame, or grief. Well, the upside down is Hawkins, Indiana shadow. It's the same town, it's the same people, but now it's distorted by darkness. And what's buried eventually demands to be acknowledged. The kids in the show move between worlds as they grow up. The upside down symbolizes the moment childhood safety collapses. It symbolizes when the world no longer feels predictable and when adults fail to protect the kids. And this mirrors real life transitions such as divorce, death, betrayal, and of course, sudden abandonment. The mind flayer in the show represents loss of autonomy, external forces hijacking the self, and emotional possession. And this is where you could clue into abuse, definitely coercive control, addiction, and even ideological extremism. People become not themselves, but yet they still look the same. So, what is Stranger Things really about? You're probably asking. So, you know what? Let's ask, what are the Duffer brothers saying with Stranger Things? What's it really about? Well, connection versus isolation. The upside down thrives on isolation, and the real world is saved through friendship, loyalty, truth telling, staying emotionally connected. And what happens when the adults fail? That's when the children are left to fight the battles. Institutions lie, authorities dismiss the truth, systems protect themselves. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like what you go through with a midlife crisis divorce? Institutions lying, authorities dismissing the truth, and the system that was built to protect us actually protects the perpetrators. And why does the upside down resonate so deeply? Because really, most people have lived in one metaphorically. After betrayal, during depression, in abusive relationships, in grief, in a sudden life bomb drop. You're still in the same world, but everything feels wrong. It feels muted, cold, unrecognizable. The upside down is the psychological underworld where trauma, fear, and unacknowledged pain live until they're confronted. If you've ever said, I'm still living in the same house, the same town, the same life, but nothing feels real anymore, well, this episode is for you. So today we're talking about Stranger Things, not as entertainment, but as a psychological blueprint for what happens during a midlife crisis betrayal. Because for left behind spouses and children, MLC does not feel like divorce. It feels like being dragged into the upside down. Same person, same face, same life, but everything is cold, distorted, hostile, and unsafe. In Stranger Things, the upside down is a parallel world, a mirror of reality, frozen at the moment something went wrong. And that is exactly what happens in midlife crisis betrayal. The family didn't slowly erode. There weren't years of obvious dysfunction. Instead, one day you're in a healthy marriage, and the next day, boom, bomb drop. And suddenly, the rules change, reality shifts. The person you trusted is unreachable. You didn't move worlds, but the world flipped. So let's be very clear here, because this matters. Many MLC behaviors are not just selfish or midlife rebellion, they are totally dissociative. And dissociation is when someone detaches from their identity. They split off uncomfortable emotions. They split off from uncomfortable emotions. They suppress guilt, grief, fear, or shame. They rewrite history to survive psychologically. They rewrite history to survive psychologically. And this is why they go around saying things like, I was never happy. It's been 20 years. I've been unhappy. Well, you guys, in Stranger Things, the mind flayer possesses people while hollowing them out. They look the same, but they are not the same. That is dissociation. And you see it when you watch Stranger Things. And here's the deal. Affairs don't just happen during midlife crisis, they accelerate it. Betrayal acts like the gate that 11 opened. Once betrayal occurs, then shame increases, reality fractures, justification replaces accountability, empathy collapses, and to survive what they've done, they've got to dehumanize the spouse, rewrite the marriage, minimize the children's pain, and paint boundaries as disrespect. If you have a boundary, you're going to be called disrespectful from your parent who's in midlife crisis. And now, let's talk about the kids. Children don't just adjust. They experience betrayal trauma when a parent suddenly abandons values. They were raised to have values and a moral compass, and now their parent is asking them to respect the opposite of what they've always been taught to respect. And this creates betrayal trauma. The family narrative collapses. They're asked to accept an affair partner, and this causes hypervigilance, anxiety, trust issues, emotional numbing, identity confusion. They didn't lose a parent to death. They lost a parent to psychological absence. And that is profoundly destabilizing. And I think the older the kids are, the more they sense that because the more they were raised with having morals in place. And why does the left behind spouse feel crazy? This is critical, you guys. You're not crazy. You are just reacting to an unreality. In the upside down, logic doesn't apply. Time feels warped. Communication fails. Threats replace conversation. And logic does not apply to anything. And this is why left behind spouses often say, "Oh my God, it feels like I'm dealing with a stranger. Nothing I say lands or makes sense to him." They're cruel in ways they never were before. You guys, that is a trauma response, not weakness. And in Stranger Things, no one escapes alone. They escape through connection, truth, anchoring to reality, and boundaries. For left behind spouses and families, healing is going to begin with naming what really happened, rejecting the gaslighting, trauma informed therapy like EMDR and somatic work, and having strong boundaries without over explaining. Remember, you cannot pull someone out of dissociation by chasing them, but you can protect yourself, and you can protect yourself and your children by healing. And the upside down doesn't disappear because you pretend it isn't there. Healing happens when truth is spoken, when trauma is acknowledged, and when people stop protecting dysfunction. If you are a left behind spouse or an adult child, you are not alone. You didn't imagine this, and you don't have to stay in the upside down forever. You have survived something that was never yours to fix. And it's so interesting because the Duffer Brothers have consistently said about their show, The Stranger Things, that it's about childhood trauma, fear, loss, identity fracture, and what happens when something unnatural invades a safe world. They intentionally created a parallel reality, frozen in time, triggered by a traumatic breach that bleeds into ordinary life. And this is textbook trauma architecture, whether they use the word dissociation or not. They have often described Stranger Things as a story about loss of innocence, how trauma changes perception, how fear alters reality, and how people become unreachable after certain experiences. The Upside Down was designed to feel familiar but wrong, recognizable but hostile, and empty of warmth and empathy. Those are phenomenal logical descriptions of dissociation. And why it applies so clearly to midlife crisis betrayal? Because good metaphors don't describe one event, they describe a human experience. Midlife crisis betrayal involves identity collapse, emotional numbing, reality rewriting, moral disengagement, psychological splitting, and that's the same mechanism the show uses for possession, mind control, personality inversion, and emotional coldness. So while midlife crisis obviously wasn't the target, trauma and dissociation were the engine. And midlife crisis just happens to be one of the most devastating adult expressions of that engine. So what's the moral of the story in Stranger Things? So you're probably asking, okay, come on, Trina, what's the moral of the story in Stranger Things? Well, Stranger Things doesn't have just one moral. I think it has a core moral spine with several interlocking truths. And that's why it resonates across ages, trauma histories, and life stages. So, evil and trauma, we know they thrive in secrecy, isolation, and denial. but they lose power when people stay connected, tell the truth, and refuse to abandon one another. So, you guys, evil and trauma, it thrives in secrecy, isolation, and denial. But evil loses power when people stay connected, tell the truth, and refuse to abandon one another. And everything in Stranger Things flows from that direction. Connection is what saves people in the end. The Upside Down feeds on isolation, silence, emotional abandonment. The real world survives through friendship, loyalty, sacrifice, and staying present even when it's hard. The kids survive because they don't leave each other behind. Even when adults, systems, and logic fail, the kids stick together. So remember, staying emotionally connected is an act of resistance. So every season shows the same pattern. Authorities deny what's happening. The institutions lie to protect themselves. Adults totally dismiss the intuition of what's going on. Meanwhile, the threat's growing. Only when the characters start to say, hey, something's wrong. This isn't normal. We've got to face it. That's when it starts to turn the tide. Refusing to name the truth allows harm to spread. And you guys, love requires sacrifice, not escape. The characters who choose love, they stay and fight. They protect each other at personal cost. They don't chase comfort at the expense of responsibility. Characters who flee responsibility are the ones out there causing harm, leaving others to clean up the damage, and it strengthens the darkness. The moral of that is that the real love shows up when things get uncomfortable. And you guys, of all people, we know trauma changes people, but it doesn't have to define you. Nearly every main character in Stranger Things carries some type of trauma. 11, Will, Max, Hopper. Some numb out, some lash out, some isolate. But healing begins when they speak the truth, when they allow help, when they reconnect to others. And that just tells you trauma explains behavior, but it doesn't excuse harm. No one in Stranger Things is fearless. They are terrified, but they act anyway. And that tells you courage is choosing integrity despite fear. That's a huge moral of the story. Courage is choosing integrity despite fear. And children pay the price when adults fail. This is a quieter but devastating moral thread, because when adults ignore reality and they protect reputations, choose comfort over truth, the children carry fear. They're out there fighting the battles. They suffer the consequences. And that's sad, because children should not have to be braver than adults. They are still children, and we should protect that for them. The world doesn't fall apart because darkness exists. It falls apart when people abandon each other instead of facing it together. And why this moral hits so hard for betrayal and MLC survivors? Because you have lived the inverse. Someone closest to you chose escape over responsibility. They chose silence over truth. They chose themselves over the family that they built. And Stranger Things quietly says, that wasn't inevitable, you guys. It was a choice. Stranger Things isn't a monster story. It's a warning about what happens when people stop showing up, and a reminder that connection is the only thing that ever brings us back. Somebody asked me the other day, well, okay, if that's true, then who is the MLCer in Stranger Things? Well, the MLCer is certainly not the hero. The MLCer is the person who becomes psychologically compromised and then makes destructive choices while disconnected from their former self. And in Stranger Things terms, the closest equivalence to that would definitely be Billy in season 3. Billy is the clearest MLC analog. He is emotionally dysregulated, has unresolved trauma, becomes dissociated, is consumed by rage, shame, and impulsivity. He turns cruel, reckless, and destructive. He endangers everyone around him, but he still looks like himself, but he isn't. Billy is responsible for his actions even while under influence, because some adult characters show fragments of MLC dynamics like emotional avoidance, escape behaviors, self-absorption, poor coping. In the show, The Stranger Things, the destructive force is really the mind flayer. Symbolically, the mind flayer represents dissociation, untreated trauma, narcissistic collapse, identity fragmentation, shame avoidance, emotional numbing, and externalization of blame. It does not force people to destroy their lives. It feeds on existing cracks. And this is the core message there, you guys. The mind flayer exploits vulnerability, amplifies darkness, rewards disconnection, thrives on secrecy. But it only has power if the person surrenders their agency. And Billy ultimately regained agency briefly and then sacrificed himself. That moment is key. And so, you guys, in real life, the mind flayer of our real lives is not a demon out there. It's unresolved trauma, fear of aging, shame, entitlement, poor coping. Affairs act as reinforcement loops, not causes. Dissociation reduces empathy, and rewriting history reduces guilt of the MLCer. But choice never disappears. MLCers are not possessed. They're disconnected from themselves and disconnected from reality. And disconnection does not absolve responsibility. And who suffers when somebody's in MLC? Well, you guys know it's the innocent, just like in the show. The spouses, the children, the families, the communities. And they didn't open the gate. They didn't invite the darkness in. They didn't benefit from the chaos, yet they're the ones paying the price. So really, if Stranger Things were an MLC story, the message would be that the real danger isn't the darkness that enters, it's the person who refuses to fight it and instead lets it consume their values. Midlife crisis doesn't destroy families. People who surrender their integrity do. So who is Vecna in Stranger Things? Well, Vecna is the primary antagonist that is introduced in season 4. Not just a monster, but a human who became something else. His origin was Henry Creel, highly intelligent, emotionally detached, and disturbed from a young age. Henry showed early signs of lack of empathy, grandiosity, contempt for others, and obsession with control. Later, he becomes Subject 001 in Dr. Brenner's experiments, and he ultimately transforms into Vecna, the ruler or architect, I guess, of the upside down. Vecna is not chaos like the Demogorgon. Vecna instead is ideology. Vecna represents unintegrated trauma, pathological narcissism, moral nihilism like humans are weak, time is a lie, control through psychological domination, and predatory exploitation of pain. Unlike the mind flayer, Vecna chooses destruction, he justifies cruelty, targets the vulnerable, and feeds on shame and guilt. And that distinction is critical, because how Vecna kills, he doesn't attack randomly. He selects people with unresolved trauma. He invades their mind, forces them to relive shame, grief, or guilt, convincingly reframes their pain as being their fault. He pushes them towards psychological collapse. You guys, that is coercive psychological abuse, not possession, and you can see it on the big screen in Stranger Things. Vecna is the pathological driver, the predatory force. It's the internal voice in the MLCer that says, you deserve this, you're entitled. And if we were going to put a metaphor of MLC into Stranger Things, this is my version. MLCer is Billy. Vecna is the belief system that rationalizes destruction. The mind flayer is dissociation. Affair partners and affairs are like the gate. The family is Hawkins, and the children are Will and Max. Vecna is a destructive internal system that has taken over someone's previous rational decision-making. The MLCer is overtaken because they stop fighting, not because they're powerless. They just stop fighting. Even in Stranger Things, Vecna does not remove choice. Billy ultimately resists. Max fights back. Will senses what's happening. Agency is impaired, not erased. They are overtaken because they stop fighting, not because they're powerless. And you guys, even in Stranger Things, there's a tunnel. Psychological narrowing, obsession with escape, emotional numbing, time distortion. Like, I gotta get through this. I gotta get through this. Dehumanization of those left behind. And people that are in that tunnel, now they feel justified, they feel driven, disconnected, entitled to relief. And they often cannot see the wreckage behind them until much later, if ever. People often describe midlife crisis betrayal as if a demon took over. And not because that's literally true, but because dissociation and moral disengagement can so completely override someone's values that they become unrecognizable. And just like in the show, it feels like Vecna because something predatory takes over, not from the outside, but from within. You guys, the person you loved didn't disappear, but they stopped choosing who they used to be. Seriously, think about it. They stopped choosing who they used to be. So again, you guys, these metaphors I've used today are used to describe psychological processes such as dissociation, identity disruption, trauma responses, and moral disengagement that can occur during extreme stress, midlife crisis, or betrayal. These processes may help explain behavior, but they do not excuse harm and they do not remove personal responsibility. This episode is for education and awareness, entertainment, and not diagnosis, and nothing here replaces professional mental health care and attention. Thanks for joining me today on Midlife Crisis, Bomb Drop, and Beyond. I hope you found this a little entertaining and interesting, and I hope you're staying safe out there and having a great week, and we'll see you soon on our next episode. Hey, and stay tuned for our next episode around New Year's Day, where we're going to meet with a left behind spouse who just recently met her husband's new girlfriend, and she got through it okay. And she realized after meeting her, she says, that gal's really nice. And she's happy for her husband. And she's going to give us some little tidbits of information. And I think you guys will get some hope and a different perspective. So stay tuned. That's on our New Year's episode coming out right around the corner in 2026. All right, we'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us today on Bomb Drop and Beyond. Hey, some resources that are available for you guys are thewifeexpert.com. That's Lori McDermott over there at thewifeexpert.com. She also has a new app out. There's tons of videos that can give you all kinds of information on no matter where you are on your MLC journey or trying to reconcile with your spouse. So check out thewifeexpert.com. And if you're not sure if your spouse or yourself is in maybe approaching or in a midlife crisis, be sure to check out Kenda Root's quiz at midlifecrisismarriageadvocate.com. Again, that's a midlifecrisismarriageadvocate.com. That's a quick little 2-minute quiz. It's free. So check that out as well. We have a ton of resources out there for you guys. So check them out. Thanks. You guys, forward moving spouses, you are not alone. Left behind spouses, you are not alone. Those in crisis, you are certainly not alone. This is just crazy how epidemic this has become. I have a waiting list now of people from around the world that I'm trying to get to. And if you've been through a midlife crisis or been impacted by someone else's and you want to share your story, I'd love to hear from you. Hang in there, you guys. I will get to all of you. Please reach out to me at mlcbombdrop gmail.com, and visit us on Facebook and Instagram, MLC Bomb Drop. And just remember, your voice matters. Your story could be the one that helps someone else feel seen. It could help someone else feel heard. And it will help somebody else feel understood. You are not alone, no matter where you are in your journey. If the bomb was just dropped, the earthquake just happened, if you are 7 or 8 years in and you're coming out of starting to wake up and awaken to this, um, you are not alone. It's sad that this is epidemic, but we're here to provide support. So until next time, take care and live authentically each and every day. Thanks again, you guys.